Last up, Representative Lavielle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. I will not go into exorbitant detail either. I think that we've heard quite a lot of detail, and that was necessary. But I do have questions on one specific topic and then a general one. And I'd like to start with Mr. Bates. In your testimony, you detailed the accomplishment of the wind transaction and what this would do for the New London State Pier and, as a result, the economy of the state. And I won't question the advisability of the deal. That's not something I've gone into in great depth. But I do have a few questions regarding it, how it was done and where it is now. One of them is, what exactly is the status of that transaction? Who has signed what?
Thank you. So I can comment on the status up to the point where I left the board. And on May 2nd, a term sheet and MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, were signed by Eversource, Orsted, and the Connecticut Port Authority. I can't remember, there may have been, Gateway might have been on that, I can't recall. But what that was for, because it's important to understand the process, is that's all the parties coming to the table and saying, we want to do this, you'll put in this, we'll put in that. And then it's to do a comprehensive harbor development agreement. So then you actually plan, like, what does this look like? There's a lot of technical work, millions of dollars potentially of technical work that have to go in to doing the final plan. And so that harbor development agreement was always envisioned to be negotiated over the coming months. And as far as where it is now, that's for the new team.
Has the state actually, or I suppose I should say an agency of the state, actually committed with finality state dollars to this agreement?
So what I can speak to is the term sheet and MOU for the wind power agreement, or the opportunity at State Pier. That was that Bay State Wind, which is the combination of, I think it's been renamed, but the combination of Orsted and Eversource, we're going to put in $35 million. There was already $22.5 million from a purchase power agreement that had been done already, pledged by Deepwater Wind and Orsted combined for different purchase power agreement components. So there you have a private sector investment of $57.5 million. The Port Authority has about $25.5 million that we had been keeping aside of our bond authorization as it was being kind of reduced. We went to the bond commission and said, please, can we have some, because State Pier needs $100 million of work. So we have $25.5 million commitment from the Port Authority. DECD at the time said it would put up $10 million in the form of a loan. That comes to, I think, $93 million. I had to do that last night again. But yeah, so that's the commitment that was made that day in May, and I have no reason to doubt that that commitment wouldn't be carried forward tomorrow.
So, in other words, there is an extant bond authorization for $25.5 million?
Yeah, I'd have to look up what extant means, but
it's existing, it's
existing,
the same thing.
It's existing, yes, we already got it. So we went to the bond commission and said, this is to upgrade State Pier. And really what's fascinating about this development is that if you go to State Pier near London, a lot of the land can't be used. It's a hill. So with these funds, we can level the hill, fill in behind the pier, so you're getting a ton of new usable space with this private sector investment. And we still own the asset. The people of Connecticut, the Port Authority, and then even after wind is done with whatever they're doing, we still have this asset. We have a rail link, which Joe Courtney and others help get money for, upgrading. And so I would suggest to whoever comes afterward, while wind is using the full potential of the port, that's a great opportunity to plan years ahead in terms of manufacturing centers up that rail corridor, because then you can ship things in and out of the port. Right now, nothing is leaving the port.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Bates, but I'm not questioning the advisability of the deal. I'm trying to find out at what stage it is, what money has been committed, how it was committed, who has approved it.
Right.
So while my use of the word extant was correct, my use of authorization I don't think was. I think what I meant to say was bond allocation.
Yes. We
By
have
the
that.
bond commission. That is signed, sealed, delivered.
Yes,
And when
indeed.
did that happen?
Oh, probably a year ago. There were a couple tranches. There was 15 million, probably a year ago. Then the remainder. So we've gotten some, all for fixing up State Pier. It didn't seem wise to spend it until we figured out what the final plan was. And the point was to put that aside and go to the market and say, we have this money on the table, what can you do? Knowing that that money will be there to help develop the port.
And it was, you've used a couple of times now the phrase fixing up the State Pier.
Yeah.
So when that money was it allocated for a general purpose of fixing
Yes.
up the State Pier, not specifically for this wind
There are a
agreement?
list of specifics which could take a lot of money to take care of, and those were provided to the bond commission, and they approved it, I think, unanimously.
Well, my question really is, was the bond commission given this proposed transaction specifically to approve the money for?
The money for, that's been put aside by the bond commission
Yeah.
could not begin to develop the pier to the standards of what this deal is. So we could spend all 25.5 million just leveling the hill.
So the structure of the deal for which the money would be spent was left to the discretion of the board?
The legislatively and gubernatorially appointed members of the board, 4 of whom are state commissioners, yes.
Right. And let's see. So has there been any question of, since this involves a substantial sum of what is ultimately taxpayer money, was there any attempt to review this with the state contracting board to see if this was indeed met certain criteria, whether this was the best provider possible or pair of providers, et cetera?
Right. Well, it was the only provider, and the construction hasn't happened. And so I'm sure, you want to go through those kind of things when you're doing the actual contract. But again, the harbor development agreement to be finalized is not there. What you have is a memorandum of understanding and a term sheet. So you have the promise and commitment of all the parties at the table. So there's opportunity for these kind of things. I think the next team has probably been working on that.
So it's not a finalized contract at this point. If the state of Connecticut said, actually, we don't want to do this, or we're not going to spend the money, that would not be a violation of a contract?
I can't speak to that. I think I'd leave that to the Port Authority. A lot has gone on since my time on the Port Authority. But if that were your choice, I'm sure other states would be happy to work with those partners.
I'm not suggesting that should be done. Again, today I do not have an opinion of that deal. So I wanted to be clear that that's not my intent on asking you those questions. And I appreciate the answers. However, what does concern me is that in a period when the auditors have given us a report that shows that a lot of oversight, internal oversight, was missing on various levels, and we've gone through what those are. I'm not going to rehash them again. That if anything was signed or agreed to during that period, might it have escaped some of the same oversight that was owed to other activities? And that's what concerns me about that deal. It's not the deal itself. It could be a perfectly fine deal, and I'm not placed or informed right now to judge that. But I am concerned about where this leaves us, whether the right attention, the proper attention, that under normal circumstances would be given to any significant transaction was given to this one.
So that's when you look at the legal costs. We had Robinson and Cole engaged. We had Meyer Brown, which is also had worked on, I think, 24 infrastructure projects around the world.
I'm familiar with Meyer Brown.
Right. And we also had Seabury Consulting, which are maritime financial advisors who have gone down this road, most recently in Delaware. So we had hired the expertise to be confident going into those negotiations. But, you know, certainly I think now it's all being reviewed anyway by other authorities, perhaps, and so they might have something to say to you later today. But that's what the actions we took while I was chair of the board.
Do the members of the Transportation Committee have access to all of these documents, the MOU plus the reviews by the various firms that were asked to advise?
I think you can ask that question of the existing authority. By that I mean the new acting chair and others.
Understood. Thank you. That would probably be a good idea for us to review.
Sure.
Thank you for that. My second area of questioning goes back to what we've heard in some of the recent conversations about. I too am interested in what we can do better in the future and how do we address the issues that have been brought forth to us by the auditors. And I know this is often not customary because I've served on boards myself, and you and I, by the way, we share a great deal of experience on the international level with various economic development authorities. So I'm familiar with some of the same things that you are, and both in this country and outside it where I lived for some time. So again, this is a sort of strange question, but is there an existing description of or was there when you were serving, of the board chairman's activities? Was there anything you could refer to, anything documented that explained what it was you were to do?
I don't think so. I just consulted my other board chair or our other board chair. I don't think so. But you know, you learn good practice from experience. As I mentioned, I'd served on several boards before, and I had a vice chair, Commissioner Smith, who was present and helpful.
So, Ms. Ream-Snyder, you would agree with that assessment as well?
If there's a document, I wasn't made aware of it.
Thank you. I'm not surprised. As I say, it's a sort of a strange question. I don't think board chairs are usually provided with a job description per se. I know that Mr. Matthews has said on a few occasions this morning and afternoon that some of the procedures that were mentioned in the audit regarding ethics, employees, accounting records, expense documentation, and so on, that he wasn't told that procedures needed to be developed in those areas, and I'll buy that. But what I'd like to know is, did you on the board ever feel that there was a lack of information coming to you, not because anyone was hiding something, but because there were serious gaps in procedure that you would want to ask the executive director specifically to address? I have served on boards myself where the chair and the board again and again asked for these types of things and got them, but they did have to ask. That's not uncommon. And did you ask for any of these things, any of these procedures that the auditors said were lacking?
So I just go back to the fact that there were policies and procedures in place. It's just, and again, probably clarification from the auditors will help in your next part of the panel. We didn't report that they existed in the fashion I think that the auditors wanted. So for example, we did want operating policies and procedures. We had them. We had policies and procedures regarding the ship grants. We had them regarding an affirmative action policy. So policies were in place, but it's hard to know what you don't know. And so I think going forward, it would be great to have all of those actually spelled out for future quasis.
And I might add that in regards to the Finance Committee, there were times that we were asking for more information from the reports we were getting. And it was one of the reasons we were looking at programs to see if we could get a program that could drill down the way we wanted the reports to be able to drill down. The entire Finance Committee agreed with that. So we were asking questions.
Where I am feeling very fuzzy about this whole thing, I'm not sure if this is a question or not, is that, as Representative Devlin pointed out a little while ago, some of these things just seem to be common sense, ethical, prudent, intelligent, and in the private sector or on a nonprofit board, these big gaps in information just don't seem like they would fly. So did either of you actually approach anyone, and I know you had some commissioners on your board as well, did you approach any state agency to say, look, we're not actually getting these things. We're not capable of making decisions because we don't have the information. Is there something you can hand us? Is there something, because you were working with, what was it, Connecticut Innovations and I think the DOT, but did you actually, of your own accord, ask and approach them and say, look, we've got to have this? Because that's something I've seen board chairs do frequently. And I just wonder, was there a vacuum there? Because we've talked about, did you have access? I think you did have access. Did you take advantage of it?
I would say yes, because originally when the Finance Committee was created, we had someone from, I believe it was the Treasurer's Office, who served for 6 months and then retired. We appointed a new member, was not from the state. Someone else, when those statutory offices sent people to the meetings, it wasn't always the same person. It was a designee. It was, sometimes it was the commissioner, sometimes it was the deputy, sometimes it was someone else. The most consistent one was Catherine Smith. She was really committed to this, and she worked very hard with us on meeting those, but she also worked hard on the negotiations. Last spring, we had someone new from, I think she was from OPM, and she said, I know a lot about finance, I'm happy to help you, and I had reached out to her, and we were planning on sitting down and going through it, and that was probably March or April. So we were trying to take advantage when we could.
Thanks. Right, and referencing the situation when Mr. Matthews had his health event, Vice Chair Smith provided somebody at DECD to help us consult about his benefits and what that would be like. I wanted to go back to your question about negotiations. Mm-hmm. The state was at the table the whole time. Catherine Smith was part of the negotiating committee.
You're referring to the wind transaction.
Yeah. And so there was that kind of level of engagement. It wasn't just us thinking it's a great idea, which we do, but the state was at the table, and I believe remains at the table.
Thank you. I'm not going to extend this any longer for all the reasons everyone has given. Those are two areas of pretty grave concern for me. I just want to make a couple of comments and I'll finish. So no more questions for you all. But I do believe that some of these functional gaps in oversight are unusual and strange. And things can happen, mistakes can happen. I mean, people are human. But it seems that, just again, I've read the auditor's report. Not only have I know it's been said that no other quasi has come in with quite with problems quite this extensive. And certainly, I know that in anything but the public sector, this would have been recognized and dealt with much earlier, because alarm would have been sounded very loudly. So something is missing there. I've talked about the wind agreement. I think we need to do a more extensive review, because not because of any flaw in the agreement, but because of the circumstances that were in effect at the time it was being negotiated. And finally, I just want to remind everybody of something. I think we need to keep this in mind. This is not about who did what, and it's not, frankly, about how difficult it has been for certain individuals. I mean, I understand that. It's always difficult when there's an awkward situation. But that's not what we're trying to resolve here. It's not about making things easier and more comfortable for those in charge. First off, one of the things that I've heard that is a little disquieting to me is that for people who are judged very, very competent, which I don't doubt, I don't have any problem with that, it seems to be necessary to give more precise instructions than we may think necessary under normal circumstances. Should we be ethical? Yes. Should we exercise strict oversight over our expenses? Yes. Should we have very clear accounting records? Yes. But evidently more stricter and more precise instructions are necessary. But in the end, what this is really about is not the people involved, but it's making sure that Connecticut residents and taxpayers get something for their money, get a good deal for their money, get proper oversight for their money and proper stewardship of it. And I think we have to keep that in mind at all times. And that should be our goal as we go forward in deciding really how quasi-publics should be assisted and overseen, and of course managed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you for that summation. I think that gets to the heart of where we need to go, that we have proper oversight, we have proper staffing, we have proper funding, we have proper controls in place. So as we go forward into the new sessions to input those proposals, I would hope we get full support for that in a bipartisan way, because that'll be important to make sure that we have a successful organization. So.